Most women have no idea that one sentence can completely change the way a man thinks about them long after a conversation ends. Not because the sentence was clever, not because it sounded impressive, but because it touched something emotional inside him that most women never think to reach. And once that happens, he keeps replaying the moment in his head long after you're gone. The problem is that most women compliment men the way they were told men want to be complimented. They focus on appearance, on achievements, on the surface. And those things feel fine in the moment, but they disappear quickly because they don't land anywhere emotionally deep. That is why some women get a man's attention for an evening, while other women stay in a man's mind for days without doing anything dramatic or obvious. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Isabella, and on this channel we talk about female psychology, attraction, emotional connection, relationships, and the hidden emotional dynamics most people never learn about. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because these videos will completely change the way you understand men and attraction. Now let's continue, because what I'm about to explain today is something most women go their entire lives without understanding. A lot of women assume men don't think emotionally about attraction, that they respond only to looks, to physical presence, to obvious signals. But psychology tells a very different story. Men feel emotional impact far more deeply than most women realize. They just rarely talk about it. And this is where most women miss something important. They compliment men in ways that feel generic, expected, or surface level. You're so funny. You look great tonight. You're really smart. And those aren't bad things to say, but they don't create emotional depth. They pass through a man's mind and disappear because there is nothing personal, specific, or emotionally unexpected about them. But the moment a compliment feels emotionally specific, emotionally real, and genuinely observant, something shifts psychologically. His mind pauses. He starts feeling emotionally noticed instead of just socially acknowledged. And that creates something most women don't realize they have the power to create: emotional curiosity. Men are far more emotionally responsive than they appear on the surface. They notice when something feels different. They notice when a woman is actually paying attention to who they are beneath the obvious. And today I'm going to break down 3 types of compliments that create emotional impact in a completely different way, because they speak to deeper parts of a man's emotional identity, instead of just confirming what he already knows about himself. Before we continue, comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because I genuinely love seeing people from all over the world in these conversations. The first compliment is powerful because it makes a man feel emotionally seen in a way he almost never experiences. And honestly, this is where most women separate themselves completely from everyone else. The compliment is this: the way you handled that says a lot about who you are. Simple, calm, and psychologically very powerful when it comes from genuine observation. Most women would never think a sentence like this could affect a man deeply, because the assumption is that men want to be told they're attractive or impressive. But men process emotional recognition very differently from how women expect. A man already knows when he's done something well on the surface. He's received professional feedback, social validation, basic praise. After a while, that kind of acknowledgement starts feeling routine because it's attached to the outcome, not to him as a person. But when a woman notices how he handled something, the way he stayed calm, the way he chose his words, the way he treated someone in a difficult moment, it creates a completely different emotional reaction, because now he feels understood, not just praised. And that feeling is genuinely rare for most men. Most people in a man's life respond to what he does. Very few pay attention to how he does it. That is why this kind of observation lands so much deeper emotionally. It touches identity, not performance. And here is something many women never realize. Men remember women who make them think differently about themselves. The moment you genuinely notice something real about the way he operates as a person, his mind immediately starts asking questions internally. What exactly did she notice? What did she see in that moment? What part of me stood out to her? And that curiosity creates emotional replay. Not because the sentence was dramatic or beautifully crafted, but because it felt personal in a way that almost nothing else does. This is why emotional specificity matters so much in attraction. Generic acknowledgement disappears quickly. Specific emotional observation stays in the mind, because it feels like it could only have come from someone who was actually paying attention. And another thing that makes this compliment work is that it feels emotionally safe rather than emotionally aggressive. You are not chasing his approval. You are not trying to flatter him into liking you. You are simply noticing something real about him that most people walk past. That kind of attention instantly separates you from women who only respond to what's on the surface. But here's the part that matters most. This compliment only lands when it comes from genuine observation. Men are more emotionally perceptive than they let on. If it sounds rehearsed, if it sounds like a line you read somewhere, the emotional impact disappears immediately. That is why emotional presence matters more than any memorized phrase. When you truly pay attention to a man, when you listen carefully, when you notice the small things, your words carry emotional weight naturally because they're coming from a real place. And honestly, this is what many men quietly want more than almost anything else. Not constant praise, not obvious flattery, but to feel like someone actually noticed who they are beneath the performance they maintain every day. The second compliment works on a much deeper emotional level because it touches something many men think about privately, but almost never hear reflected back to them. The compliment is this: talking to you actually makes me think differently about things. Now, to a lot of women, this might sound simple or even understated, but psychologically, this kind of compliment can stay in a man's mind for a very long time because it speaks to something he cares about deeply, even if he never says so directly. Most men carry a quiet need to feel mentally significant to someone they're attracted to. Not just physically wanted, not just socially entertaining, but genuinely influential on the way someone sees the world. It is one of the deeper emotional needs men have that almost no one talks about openly. And this is why this compliment lands differently from almost everything else a woman could say. You are not telling him he's attractive. You are not telling him he's funny. You are telling him that his mind, the way he thinks, the perspective he brings, actually changed something in you. And emotionally, that feels significant in a way that no surface-level compliment can touch. Here's what makes this psychologically powerful. It creates a specific kind of curiosity in him that he cannot easily put down. The moment you say that talking to him changes how you think, his mind immediately starts moving. What did I say? Which part landed? What did she take away from this? And that internal movement keeps the conversation alive in his mind long after it ended. This is important because male attraction often builds through emotional imagination more than people understand. Men replay interactions where they felt genuinely influential, not just liked. They revisit the moments where someone made them feel like their inner world mattered, not just their outer presentation. That is why some women stay in a man's mind without texting constantly or making dramatic gestures. Their emotional presence created impact that kept replaying on its own. And another reason this compliment works is because of what it communicates about you. It tells him that you are someone who actually engages with ideas, who listens beyond the surface, who takes conversations seriously enough to let them affect your thinking. That combination, being genuinely perceptive and willing to say so directly, is rare enough that men notice it immediately. Most conversations in attraction stay light. They stay entertaining and comfortable and pleasant. But the moment a conversation feels like it actually mattered intellectually and emotionally, it stands apart from everything else. And honestly, this is where many women accidentally miss an opportunity. They worry that expressing genuine intellectual appreciation will seem too intense or too forward. But a calm, sincere observation about how someone thinks does not create pressure. It creates connection. And connection is what takes attraction from temporary interest to something a man keeps thinking about quietly for days. The third compliment is probably the most emotionally layered of all three because it creates a feeling that men rarely experience and almost never hear named directly. The compliment is this: there's something about the way you make space for people that I don't see very often. Now, most women would assume that men don't care deeply about this kind of observation. Modern dating often tells women that men only respond to physical signals, to obvious interest, to straightforward pursuit. But psychology tells a very different story about what actually moves men emotionally. Men who care about how they show up in the world, who think carefully about how they treat people, who put genuine effort into being present and considered in their interactions, almost never hear that noticed. People acknowledge their achievements. People acknowledge their appearance. But almost no one stops and names the quality of how they make others feel. And that gap between how much effort a man quietly puts into that and how rarely it gets seen is exactly where this compliment lands. When you name it, you are touching something he has worked on internally that most people never see. And here's why this affects men so deeply psychologically. It communicates that you are paying attention to the kind of man he is at his core, not just what he offers on the surface. It tells him that the parts of himself he values most, the parts that have nothing to do with status or achievement, are visible to you. And that kind of recognition creates a specific emotional experience that is different from any other form of attraction. It feels like being truly known rather than simply desired. Now, let's be honest. A lot of men have learned to expect that relationships operate mostly on surface-level signals. They show up, they put in effort, they perform the expected roles, and they receive attention in return. But underneath that, many men are quietly hoping for something more. Not endless depth in every conversation, but the feeling that the person they are interested in is actually paying attention to who they are when no one is performing for anyone. When a woman names something that real about him, something that specific and that quiet, it breaks through everything else and lands in a place that almost nothing else can reach. But here is what matters most about how this compliment works. It is not about flattery. It is not about saying something generous to make him feel good. It is about genuine observation. Men can feel the difference between someone paying a social compliment and someone who actually stopped and noticed something real. When the observation is authentic, when it is specific enough that it could only come from someone who was actually watching, it carries emotional weight that no amount of generic kindness can produce. And that emotional weight is what creates replay. It is what makes him think about you later that night. Not because you impressed him, but because you made him feel something he rarely feels. Fully seen. Now that you understand these 3 compliments, there is something even more important you need to understand. Because this is where most women get it wrong even after they learn the right words. The words themselves are not the real power. The emotional presence behind the words is what actually creates the impact. Many women hear advice like this and immediately turn it into a strategy. They memorize the phrases. They look for moments to insert them. They start treating the compliment as a technique rather than as an expression of something genuine. And the moment that happens, the emotional power disappears completely. Men are more emotionally perceptive than they appear. A man may not always be able to explain it in words, but he can feel when a woman is performing versus when she is actually present. He can feel when a compliment comes from genuine attention versus when it comes from a script. And the moment something feels performative, the emotional connection it was supposed to create does the opposite. It creates distance instead. That is why emotional presence matters so much more than any memorized line. When something you say comes from real observation, when it comes from actually listening and actually paying attention, it lands completely differently from the outside. It feels natural. It feels specific. It feels like it could only have come from you in that moment about that person. And another thing many women overlook is this. Men are not deeply affected by the women who try hardest. They are often most affected by the women who are most genuinely present. A woman who listens carefully, who notices things most people miss, who speaks with calm intention rather than emotional urgency, feels different from everyone else in a man's experience. Not because she is playing a game, but because genuine attention is one of the rarest things a person can offer. And men feel that rarity even when they cannot name it. This is also why emotional pacing matters so deeply. You cannot rush emotional impact. You cannot create emotional depth by stacking compliments one after another. In fact, too much too quickly often feels like pressure rather than connection. But when a single genuine observation lands at the right moment, when it comes from real noticing rather than strategic timing, it becomes memorable precisely because it felt effortless. Now she feels like she actually saw me, not like she was trying to make me feel good. And that distinction is everything. One thing most women never fully consider is that male attraction often deepens quietly before it becomes visible. Many men do not respond to emotional impact immediately or dramatically. Instead, something happens internally. The interaction ends and the mind keeps moving. He is in the car, or in his apartment, or in the middle of something else entirely, and the conversation comes back. He replays something you said. He remembers the specific way you noticed something. He wonders what that observation meant about how you see him. And that replay, that quiet internal return to a moment, is where attraction deepens far more than most women realize. This matters because women often look for immediate signals. They want to see a visible reaction in the moment. And when a man seems calm or measured after hearing something that landed deeply, they assume it didn't land at all. But emotional processing in men often happens on a delay. The depth shows up later, in the replay, in the way he finds himself wanting to see her again, without being entirely sure why. The moment you made him feel emotionally understood is the moment that keeps coming back. Not the moment you looked best, not the moment you were most entertaining, but the moment something you said made him think differently about himself. And honestly, this is where emotionally aware women create something most women never do. They create a specific emotional association. When a man keeps returning to a particular interaction mentally, when he keeps replaying a specific moment, he begins associating those feelings with you. The curiosity, the recognition, the sense of being genuinely seen, all of that becomes connected to your presence in his mind. And that emotional association is what moves attraction from casual to lasting. It is the difference between someone he enjoyed spending time with and someone he keeps thinking about when she is not around. There is also something many women overlook completely when it comes to what makes men emotionally remember a conversation. It is not intensity. It is not drama. It is not the most exciting or the most beautiful or the most impressive version of you. It is the version of you that was actually present, that was calm enough to notice something real, that was secure enough to name it without turning it into a performance. That emotional groundedness, the quality of being genuinely there rather than performing for an audience, is something men feel immediately, even if they never put a word to it. A woman who is comfortable enough in herself to observe quietly and speak directly and let the moment breathe naturally, that woman stays in a man's mind far longer than the woman who was the most impressive person in the room. This is also why consistency matters more than most people talk about. A man trusts emotional recognition when it feels like part of who you are, not like something you turned on for the occasion. When your attention feels genuine across different moments, when the things you notice feel real rather than calculated, his emotional openness around you grows naturally. He starts to feel like he can be the real version of himself around you. Not the version that performs, not the version that manages impressions, but the version that actually exists when no one is watching. And that feeling of emotional safety, the sense that he does not have to earn your attention by impressing you, is one of the most powerful things a woman can create in a man's experience of her. Most men will never say this directly. They will not come to you and explain that what moved them most was the way you noticed something quiet about them, or the way you made them feel intellectually significant, or the way you named something in them that they had quietly worked on for years without anyone ever seeing. They will not put those words together out loud, but they will think about you. They will find reasons to be in the same space as you. They will replay the specific moment something you said landed differently from everything else. And they will feel something they might not be able to name but will recognize immediately, the feeling of being genuinely known. That is the real power here. Not a technique, not a strategy, not a set of phrases you memorize and deploy at the right moment. The real power is in becoming the kind of woman who actually pays attention, who listens carefully enough to notice what most people miss, who is secure enough in herself to name what she sees without dressing it up or performing it, who understands that emotional impact is not created by saying the most impressive thing, but by saying the most specific and genuine and observant thing at the moment when it is true, because that is what stays, that is what replays. That is what makes a man lie awake quietly thinking about you long after the conversation ended. Not because you were perfect, but because you made him feel something real. And in a world where most interactions stay at the surface, that feeling is rare enough that he will not forget it. If you made it all the way to the end, comment, "I watched till the end" below, so I know who really stayed for the full conversation. And before you go, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications because I post new videos every week on female psychology, attraction, emotional connection, and the hidden emotional dynamics most people never learn about.